Welcome back to SledgeHammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Today, I'm joined by somebody I've quickly become very good friends with, co-host of the House That Screams Horror podcast, Shawn Smith. Shawn, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me.
Oh, this is such an honor. We've worked together a couple times on your podcast. I do have the links for those right down here in the description, guys, so you can check those out. We worked together talking about Halloween 2018, as well as one of my favorite movies growing up, SLC Punk, Salt Lake City Punk. So you guys could check those out. But in addition to the podcast, Shawn is a skateboarder, husband, father of three. He used to front a few metal bands back in the day, which is so fucking dope. So with the podcast, I've had you and I've had Rob. What was it to start the podcast with such a large group of people?
Well, it's kind of funny how it all worked out. So maybe you don't know this, but I'm kind of an introvert by nature.
Mm-hmm.
And Candy had gotten the opportunity to be on a couple podcasts. And she came to me one day and she said, I want to start my own podcast. And I kind of did that whole, husbandly, like, that's nice, And she decided she wanted to do it. She wanted me to be a part of it. And I'm like, okay, I don't, it's not something I've really ever wanted to do. But I thought, okay, you know what? She wants me to do it. I'll do it, And I got hooked. And we were talking about something that I loved. And I realized she even pointed out, like, you talk more on the podcast than you do around the house. Like, and that's kind of the thing. Like, you get me talking about something that I really enjoy. And it's hard to shut me up.
Right. Well, and that's it. Shaun of the Dead, like when I came on the podcast, we connected right away, because I met you obviously through Candy, who's a good friend of mine. And it's funny, the similarities between Candy and I and you and Ashley. Like, Ashley is also the introvert, and people talk about her being on the podcast and stuff when we Didn't See That Coming or our live videos. And I'm like, you know what? The only reason she does those is I told her her idea was Didn't See That Coming. That was totally her brainchild. And I said the only way I would do it is if she joined me. And the same thing with the live videos. And now she absolutely loves it. So it's so funny to see the similarities in how this happens between us and you guys and how close of friends we are. It's so funny how that works out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny how our podcast grew to the size that it did. I listen to so many different podcasts, and it's, you usually have one or two, maybe three people, and it's very structured. And, there's no structure really with us. And it just grew into, we would invite somebody on and they would come on, and the next thing you know, they're a part of the podcast and they come back every week. And it just grew and grew and grew to the point where it was kind of like, we need to like draw the line at 7, like we can't invite more people. Not only can my computer not hold, more people on here because it's the overload is just weighing down, but it's like it gets to a point where we actually had to inject some sort of system in order to allow everybody to speak, because at one point it was just you had so many people talking over one another that it was like, okay, now we have to put some structure in here just a little bit, not too much, because that's not really our thing. We're like the redheaded stepchild of horror podcasts.
Right. And not just that, but then when it comes to editing too, editing 7 different people, it's a pain in the ass.
It really is. And we had to, I told you before the podcast that we had switched from Skype to Zoom. And the reason we did that is because with Zoom, you can you have separate audio tracks.
Yeah.
With Skype, you don't. It's all in one big audio track. So if someone sneezes or coughs or clinks glass or the ice in their glass, if you want to get rid of that, you got to get rid of whoever's talking at the same time. And that became a big issue. So now with Zoom, I can edit those things out and not take away from the conversation that's taking place.
Right. And I've said this before, not only on the episode I did of my first horror movie with Candy and the one with Rob, but on the live I did with Candy as well. The House That Screams is something that I very much enjoy. And that's how we got connected, was because of my love of the podcast. And I do have the links to the podcast down here, as well as the episodes that I did with them. So make sure you guys are checking them out, because not just because they've been on the show and they're friends of mine, but it's a great podcast. And that's the reason they've been on the show, is because they're friends of mine. And I listened to the podcast and just fell in love with it. You have so many differing opinions, and the connection they have, like the reason that we did a Salt Lake City Punk episode, is so unique, how it ties into the horror world. So they take these things and they can make it about what they love, but it still has a connection into horror. So I strongly recommend you guys check that out. So Shawn, we know what you got going on with the podcast, my friend, but now I want to take it back to the past. And I want to talk about the first horror movie you ever watched, what got you started in the horror genre, and your first horror movie was
Hellraiser.
I gotta let you know. I told you this before we started, but now I can let everybody else know. I think this is episode like 215 through 220. I'm not exactly sure what number this is. First time I've ever done Hellraiser, and I could not be more excited. And the day that we talked, you told me it was going to be Hellraiser. I went and made my own little pinhead just to put the background of this video because I was so excited. This is a movie that it's funny. I never liked this movie growing up. To me, it was just like a drama almost. But then again, Clive Barker, what he does with romance and horror. The older I got, I have a good friend of mine, Josh Eppard, and he was like, listen, dude, please rewatch this movie for me. Just rewatch it. Let's check it out. And I watched it again as an older, more mature person. I was like, wow, man, a lot of the story that goes here, a lot of the body horror, everything about this movie is so fantastic. And I went out and bought the box set like a couple days later, and 1 through 4 are flawless. I love 1 through 4. All of them are great. So, do you remember how old you were the first time that you had seen Hellraiser?
8 years old.
Wow.
And I have a story. If you're
bring it.
So my mom and my dad was this grizzled special forces Vietnam vet, and the two things he loved: action movies and horror movies. And my mom was into neither of those. She was this long-haired hippie, and she wanted nothing to do with either of them. And what happened with me was, I'll break it down like the way our house was set up. It was a ranch style house, giant rectangle, and it flowed in a rectangle. So my bedroom was in the very back, and I had 2 doors, and each of those doors led to a hallway. And the one hallway was bathroom, my parents' room, into the kitchen. The other hallway led through the back, or the doorway led to the back hallway, which was a spare bedroom, and it ended out into the living room. And the way the living room was set up, the couch was facing away from that hallway. So when you walk down that hallway, you're walking up to the back of the couch. So my mom and my dad, in the late at night, my dad would have his dadcliner, the recliner that he always sat in, and my mom would either be on the couch or she would be in the bedroom reading. And this particular night, I remember waking up in the middle of the night, and I kind of maybe I had to go to the bathroom. That part's not clear. But what was clear to me was that something was on the TV that caught my attention. And as I creep into the living room, my dad is asleep in the recliner, and I kind of come over to the edge of the couch, and it is the Jesus wept scene.
Jesus wept.
In Hellraiser.
Yeah.
And it scared the living shit out of me. I didn't know what I was watching. No context. You just see this scene, and he gets ripped apart, and I'm like, bam, back in my bedroom. I had the most horrible nightmare that night. In my room, I had this ceiling fan above my bed, and I had this dream, and I get goosebumps thinking about it still. Chains came out from each blade of the fan, took my arms and my legs, and then the fan clicks on, and it feels me. Now, I don't dream that my body gets ripped apart, but when I wake up, that's the first thing I can think of is what I saw on TV. So being a kid, honest to a fault, I knew I couldn't say something to my mom about this. So I go to my dad and I tell him, I snuck in last night and I saw what you were watching on TV, and he wanted me to tell him what it was I saw, and I explained it to him. And being the father that he was, he said, you're going to sit down and watch this with me. And so we sat down and we watched the whole film. Now, I will give you a little disclaimer. When we first started talking about, first horror movie, it was kind of hard for me to pin this down because here in Indiana, we have a show called Sammy Terry. and he is like an Elvira or a Svengoolie, you know, like one of those late night horror hosts. And my mom and my dad used to let me stay up on Friday nights and watch that. And, you know, so technically I had seen other horror films, but not really watched them. Didn't really understand them. They weren't, you know, they were on. And he played mostly family-friendly stuff, Universal Monster stuff, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, you know, stuff like King Kong, you know, and all that stuff. And so this movie, when I say this was my first horror movie, this is the first movie that terrified me. This is the first movie. It not just terrified me, but it gave me that like that sickening curiosity. Like like it's gross, but I want more. You know? And so so he set me down and there we were.
And that's what a way to start, because like I said, this isn't just a horror movie. It's a story about love. Like I said, it's Clive Barker. So you know that it has that love interjection, infidelity, but it's everything rolled into one. And it's such a great movie. And Kirsty is amazing in this movie. I think she's an underrated final girl in the first two films. So we talked about obviously the Jesus wept scene. I'm assuming that was the scene that affected you the most from the film.
Well, no, because I had two scenes, and I chose that one because that was the one that pulled me in. Yeah. But I have there's another scene that is probably my favorite scene in the whole film, and that was that's the Frank Reborn.
The practical effects during this scene are so phenomenal. And I wish I could put longer than a 10-second clip up on YouTube without getting hit with copyright. But if you guys haven't seen this movie, this clip that you just seen is nothing compared to what the whole film is. So you need to go and watch Hellraiser just for the body horror alone if you've never seen it. And it's one of these movies that when you think of Hellraiser, you think of Pinhead and the Cenobites. The Cenobites are not a huge part of the first Hellraiser. You could even make the argument that they're the minor characters in the movie, but when they do pop up and they do come around, you know they're there. One of my favorite lines in the whole movie is when Pinhead is like,
demons to some, angels to others.
Just how he says that line, Doug Bradley is so subdued in this movie. He's not the in-your-face slasher type of guy, and I think that makes it even more scary how he is that as the Cenobite, as Pinhead. So we just talked about what your favorite scene was, and this is kind of a tricky question because there is, but there isn't a lot of kills throughout the Hellraiser movie, the first one at least. But which kill would be your favorite from the first Hellraiser?
I mean, honestly, like the Jesus wept scene is probably by far my favorite. You know, like you said, a lot of the kills are like hammer over the head. You know, I think she takes out like 3 dudes with a hammer.
And some of them are even just like off screen.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And you know, and the scene was cool, but I don't approve of it. But the rats nailed to the wall, right? Like there's something I can't stand about animals dying, right? And I don't want to see it. And,
right.
You know, but it's like, it was a cool effect, you know, and I remember it creeped me out when I was younger when I saw that. And I'm like, oh my God, like the mice are moving, like, you know, but, you know, but I can't do it. That's why I can't do like Cannibal Holocaust, like once and done. Because
I'm with you. I can't do it, man. Right. Like, and it's funny. We just did a live episode about, the 10 things that scared us from non-horror movies. And one of the things I had on there was Artex, the horse, drowning in the Never-Ending Story. And nobody on the chat knew that the horse, because of a malfunction, really died during that scene. You know, and like, I'm sitting here heartbroken when I hear this. And that made that scene even scarier to me as an adult watching it back. And I'm with you, man. Whenever you see an animal get in danger, you're like, no, take the human. Like, leave the animal alone.
So even thinking in like Halloween where they find the dead dog and they're like, oh, he must have ate the dog. Like, dude, come on. Like, really?
Right. Yeah, kill your sister, Mike. Leave the dog alone. Right. So we talked about Hellraiser being your first horror movie, and you are a horror aficionado. You love the horror genre. Now, I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball here. My little buddy Ghostface has a question for you. What's your favorite scary movie, Shawn? What is your favorite horror movie?
Oh, Return of the Living Dead.
I knew it.
By far.
We've talked about the most punk rock zombie movie of all time, man. That's so awesome.
Absolutely love it. That's
another movie I've yet to cover here, and I would love for someone to make. I would love to talk to someone that was their first horror movie, because that would be a blast for me to talk about. So I got a couple more questions for you before I let you go. Now, this one I've just recently started including into the chat. Remakes and reboots are kind of taking over Hollywood right now. It's something that's happening. We all know it. Some are great, some not so much. Would you like to see a hard reboot or a hard remake of Hellraiser done today?
Oh man, see, that's a tough one, and we've talked about reboots and remakes at length. The Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th reboots. No, not a big fan. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I think they did a really good job with it. It just some I don't know. It depends on who's at the helm.
Sure.
Who are you going to get to replace Doug Bradley?
Right. Well, they tried that in some of the later Hellraiser movies, and you see that did not work out well for them.
Exactly. So no, I don't think I could go for it with this one.
Well, see, and the only place where you and I will disagree here, I really like the Friday the 13th reboot, and I did not like the Texas Chainsaw one.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's weird. Like, I want to, but there's so many scenes. Like, there's some great cinematography, just like the original Texas Chainsaw. Great cinematography, like when you had the scene where the camera pans right through the bullet hole in her head, or the part where Leatherface finally puts on somebody else. Like, you see him wearing the boyfriend's face. I thought that was incredible, but it was so much almost like carbon copy to the first one in a way that when I watch a reboot or a remake, I prefer it to be like Evil Dead 2013 or Child's Play 2019, where they take the skeleton, but they put all new organs, whole new skin. They made it their own, but the skeleton of it is the same as the original. I don't want to watch a carbon copy of the first one. And you were talking about Nightmare on Elm Street. The problem I have with that, they literally take some of my favorite scenes in cinematic history, like the one of Freddy pushing against the spandex in the bedroom, and then they make it CGI and make it look so shitty. So that's the big problem I have with remakes and reboots, is when they make it carbon copy to the original, or they take these amazing scenes that blew me away as a kid and make them look shitty with CGI. So those are the two things I have a problem with on reboots and remakes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's with the Friday or the Nightmare on Elm Street, I love Jackie Earl Haley, but was he Freddy Krueger? Absolutely not.
Right. And like you just talked about replacing Pinhead, same thing with Freddy. Like with Jason, Michael, yeah, it's always been Jason and Michael, but there's always someone different under that mask. With Freddy, it was always Robert Englund. With Pinhead, it was always Doug Bradley. So when you try to take these guys that are iconic for their face, not their mask, and you try to replace them, it's just the crowd is not going to dig it, man.
Right.
Now I've talked about, like, I'd love to see Devin Sawa try to knock out Freddy Krueger. I think he could do a great job because he's just got that type of darkness to him. But in all reality, if it happened, I'd probably be like, oh, this sucks. Like, there's nothing against Devin Sawa. I would love to see it, but it's not Robert Englund. And the charisma that he has turned that from a dark slasher into a almost horror comedy by the time they got to 5 and 6. So I completely agree with that there too. So Shawn, the last question I have for you, we always go back to a skull count. And what we're doing now, we're going back to Hellraiser, and we're going to rank this 0 to 5 skulls. Now, here's the catch. We're not ranking this on production, quality, score, acting. We're not being critics. We're judging this strictly on how it affected you on first watch. And I think I know the answer, but I got to ask. 0 to 5 skulls, what would you rank Hellraiser?
Oh, I got to give it 5. And the reason for that is, like I said, this was my birth into horror. It terrified me, it excited me, and it brought that curiosity. Watching that Frank Reborn scene and the practical effects, I wanted to get into that. I wanted to do the practical effects. When it came time for me, when I graduated high school, I told my mom, I want to go to Tom Savini School in Pennsylvania. And me being an only child, she was like, absolutely not. You're not
right.
And that kind of hurt. And I had a passion for it. And you can ask my mom, I had our garage. I was building prosthetics. I was making my own fake blood. Like, she used to give me shit all the time, for all these things I was doing. But I loved it, and I enjoyed doing it. But it gave me an appreciation for makeup effects and special effects in film. And, I'm a gore hound. And sometimes we cover films that, I'm like, oh my God, like some of these special effects are just amazing. Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, some of the special effects are they're just mind blowing. And it's because of this film that I got into that.
Yeah, that appreciation for it. And it's funny because I've always said that my top 3 favorite practical effects movies are, in no order, A Nightmare on Elm Street. For the budget they had, the practical effects in that are fucking awesome. Yeah. The Thing, which goes without saying, John Carpenter really knocked it out of the park in The Thing, and then American Werewolf in London. Oh my God. Like that werewolf transformation scene is still my favorite transformation scene to this day.
Absolutely.
Like,
but I mean, and you talk budget. I mean, look at the budget for Hellraiser. I mean, this was Clive Barker's directorial debut, had $1 million, and made $20 million in the box office.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he killed it, and then went on to direct another one of my favorite films, Nightbreed, which, can't go wrong there.
Right. And it's amazing what Clive Barker has become in the horror world. With Hellraiser and Candyman alone, those are 2 stories that he wrote that you just watch him and you're like, this guy is a fucking genius. Because, and that's another thing, like we talk about Candyman 2021. I got a bunch of shit because I wasn't a fan of that movie, and it had nothing to do with the underlying tones or the woke shit. I don't care about the first Candyman is all about the same thing, but this Candyman didn't have the genuine fear that I got from watching the original, with Helen, in the garage, or when they tell the story of the little boy that got his dick cut off and he's laying in the bathroom holding himself. Like, that stuff genuinely shook me to my core as a kid. Oh, yeah. And nothing from Candyman 2021 did that for me. It was all just like, okay. Yeah.
No, I agree. And I think, to touch back to what you said earlier about, you didn't really understand, a lot in Hellraiser when you were younger. I kind of went through the same thing, at 8 years old. I didn't see the whole sadomasochistic, vibe going on. And, when I got older and I went back to revisit it, I thought, oh, fuck. There's a lot more to this story than what I had experienced when I was a child. And, the Cenobites are fucking punk, dude. Like,
dope.
Dude,
they're even wearing the suits. Like, it's amazing, man.
And the females got like the vagina neck. And you got Chatterbox, which Chatterbox fucking, he creeped me out. Like, I couldn't see enough of him. You know what I'm saying? Like I was like I don't want to look, but I'm peeking, over the edge.
And what's even scarier about him is, like, you look at the Chatterer, but like when he first comes, when Kirsty opens the box, what's he do? Puts his fucking fingers just into her mouth and holds her against the wall. Yeah. Like, I don't know why that always scared me so bad, but it's like, he could do so many different gnarly things to you right now. Like, ripping the jaw off, pulling your, like, he could do so many nasty things to her. Right. And then you get Doug Bradley with the one-liners, like we talk, and then the other one, if you betray us, we will rip your soul apart. Right. And as a young boy that grew up on Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play, I was looking for a fast-paced slasher with this. I was thinking, the Cenobites were, your slash, and that's not what this movie is. That's not what this movie's about. And as an older person, I've come to really appreciate what they did with this movie. I'm glad that it's not just a slasher. Like, it's so much more beautiful the way that it is. And I didn't ask you this, but I do want to ask, because Hellraiser is a franchise, obviously. I think they're up to 11 or 10 movies now. Is the original your favorite in the franchise?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Followed closely by the second one.
I'll always go with 2, man. I don't know what it is about 2, but that doctor, like with oh my God, that guy scared me so bad. And I love how they actually go to hell and you see everything. Like, the cinematography alone in 2 is just so fucking beautiful, man. And Ashley Lawrence has a bigger role as Kirsty Cotton in this one. Like, I'll always, it's like, but it's just like, it's a flip of a coin. Tomorrow I could say the original is my favorite. Oh yeah. But absolutely. You can't go wrong with the first 4. I think the first 4 are all fucking great.
Yeah, and I can't 100% pin this down. but I want to say Ashley Lawrence was my first like real person crush.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, like my first real crush was, I don't know if you ever saw the Inspector Gadget cartoon back in the day, but
yeah,
I 5 years old and I had like this. My mom used to make fun of me because every time that cartoon would come on, she's like, "There's your girlfriend," you know. And
that's so awesome.
But no, like Ashley Lawrence she's just so beautiful, and I mean to this day, like she looks like she hasn't aged a bit.
Right. See, for me, it was either Lar Park Lincoln from Friday 7 or Lisa Wilcox from Nightmare 4 and 5. Like one of them for sure. The first time it happened was definitely because of one of them. So that's so funny to think about now that we're adults and like we've met these people. And I'm like, oh man, like if you knew what went on in my head, you wouldn't be shaking my hand right now.
I would never tell her that to her face.
So I did say this earlier, but I do want to specify this again. All the links, not only for the podcast, but for Shawn's social media, all down here in the description, guys. So make sure you're checking it out. Please listen to the episodes that we did together. Not just because I'm on it, just because you can hear not just from Shawn and Candy and Rob, who I've had on the podcast, but Mac is on there as well. He's going to be a future guest. Me and him are just now got in contact to set up an episode. So, and all these people are the kindest, most generous people. And you'll learn in the episode, like Rob, not a fan of Salt Lake City Punk, but he did it for Candy. He watched that movie for Candy for her birthday. And these guys all are so inspirational and they're so fun to listen to. And you gain a lot of knowledge by listening to them. They're not people that just come in and talk shit. And they have a fun setup where first you got to do your line and you got to end with your rating. I'm not going to ruin anything, but the specialness of the rating alone is just so fun. The way that you got to give your rating of the film. So make sure you guys are checking out the podcast, subscribe to the podcast because you don't want to miss any episodes. I'm always pimping it on Twitter because I fucking love it. So Shawn, don't go anywhere, man. I got a couple more questions for you. Everybody else, as always, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.